Well, welcome everybody. My name is Rachel Field. I'm a professor from Bond University Law Faculty, and together with my colleague, Professor Jonathan Crowe, we're the co-conveners of the Australasian Dispute Resolution Research Network. We're delighted to welcome you to this keynote address by Professor Bernie Meyer for the 10th annual roundtable of the network. And to begin, we want to acknowledge the original custodians of the land on which Bond University sits, the Kombumerri Saltwater people of the Ugambe language group. And we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We also want to acknowledge the original custodians and the First Nations people of the lands from wherever you're joining us from today. And we mention also the First Nations people of Canada, where Bernie is joining us from today. And we just acknowledge the leadership that Indigenous and First Nations peoples have played in terms of approaches to dispute resolution and peaceful conflict resolution, from whom we learn new things all the time. So it's great to be celebrating our 10th annual roundtable for the ADR Research Network. We've been gathering since 2012, and there was only 1 year where we missed a gathering. We're a collegial network of scholars who support each other in researching and teaching dispute resolution in Australia and beyond. We are very fond of our network. It's a very supportive and influential network, I think, in terms of dispute resolution in Australia. So we're delighted to welcome Professor Bernie Meyer as our keynote speaker. He needs very little introduction to anyone anywhere in the world who knows anything about dispute resolution, I think. Bernie is internationally influential in dispute resolution theory and practice, and I think that's the most impressive thing about Bernie's work, is that it's not just theoretical, it's grounded in practical experience and expertise. His work is widely known in Australia and much cited by every member of the ADR Research Network. He was particularly influential for my own PhD work and a book that John and I have written about mediation ethics around neutrality. And we were privileged to have Bernie do a review of that book. We're most grateful for that. So Bernie was a founding partner of CDR Associates. Many of you would be aware of that group and the influence that they have had, and is also the author of many seminal works, such as The Dynamics of Conflict, Beyond Neutrality, Staying with Conflict, and The Conflict Paradox, all really, really famous and influential works. Today, Bernie's talking about his latest work, co-authored with Jackie Font-Guzman, entitled The Neutrality Trap, Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change. So we're delighted, Bernie, thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you here. The way we thought we would proceed is for Bernie to speak to us for about 15 to 20 minutes about this new book. And then with the members of the network who are able to be present this morning, we'll have some discussion about the themes and arguments and position of the book. So over to you, Bernie. I'll now share my screen so that we have a picture of the slides for you up. And there we go. So over to you. Just in terms of the audience, the other members of the panel here are going to put ourselves on, going to remove our video, although I don't think I can now that I'm sharing my screen. So I'll stay here with you, Bernie, and the others will go into the background. So over to you, Bernie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I wish I could be there in person. It'd be for a lot of reasons, but the most important is that I'd love to be part of your discussions. I was going to come to a conference of yours several years ago when I was doing, my wife and I were both doing a course at the University of New South Wales, and I managed to double schedule myself and miss it. So here I am now, not in person, but I'm really glad to be here. It would be nice to be in person to get out of the Canadian winter too, to be totally honest, but that would be a secondary benefit. But I'm very pleased to be here in this way. When I was thinking about what I wanted to say in this first of a ever experience of me pre-recording a keynote speech, somehow or other I kept on thinking of something my father said. My father was a social worker, a Holocaust survivor, and ran a program for children and adolescents with psychological problems. And I remember him saying at one point, if someone has a rat phobia, do you treat the phobia or do you get rid of the rats? And then I was thinking, at the time he said that I thought that was funny, but I also thought it made a very poignant point, which was how much we tend to focus on an individual model of health, if you will, and not a social model of it, or a systemic model of what it takes to be healthy. And what we've been going through in these last 2 years with the pandemic certainly brings that issue to the fore in an interesting way. But I also thought, of course, the answer to that is you do both. And beyond doing both, it's important that we look at the systemic roots of why there are such a disproportionate amount of rats in communities that are disadvantaged to begin with. And then what does it take to change the system that creates that reality? And that, in a way, is a metaphor for the question I'm trying to, Jackie and I tried to address in the Neutrality Trap. Because what we've tried to do there is to suggest that social change does not just come via dialogue. It's not just about bringing people together to make peace. It's not about, as I have sometimes said, showing my age, come on, people, now smile on your brother. Everybody get together, got to love one another right now. I hope that translates to Australia. And it is really much more complicated than that. And so what I have tried to do, and what I think we have to do is, as conflict interveners, peacemakers, and people who are interested in progressive social change, is we have to really come to grips with what it takes. And what it takes is sort of hinted in the subtitle of the book. It's both disrupting and connecting. And I'd like to talk a little about that and what our arguments are in it. Because I think that, let me take a step back. I think that one of the real obligations that we have as people who both practice and study conflict is to be willing to ask some pretty fundamental questions of ourselves about what we're all about. And what I have tried to do in almost all of my writing, since I really was quite, well, for the last 30 years anyhow, is to try to ask what are some of the most essential questions we have, that we have to ask in this field. And they're questions like, what are we really about and to what end? What do we really mean by helping people engage in conflict in a constructive way? What do we really mean by resolution of conflict? And what is it that we do that actually contributes to people handling conflict in a more constructive way? And what do we do maybe that gets in the way of that? And I think those fundamental questions are essential if we want to progress the work we do, to grow it, to make it more influential on dealing with the most fundamental conflicts we face, and also, quite honestly, to make sure we're on the side of really the kind of change we want, not on the side of maintaining systems of oppression, which I fear we sometimes are. So let me talk a little bit more about that. I think that we have an assumption that if we bring people together in a constructive engagement process, magic can happen. That deep issues can be addressed, and that problems that are very intractable and wicked problems can often be, if not solved, we can make a lot of progress out of this. And all of this can and sometimes does happen. Transformation occurs in conflict. Progress is made on really deep issues. But as a more general rule, dialogue alone does not cause the disruptions to systems that are required for them to reorganize, to adapt, and to change in ways that are necessary to deal with our most essential problems. Dialogue's not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. Coming together is not enough. And if we come together, we focus on dialogue, we focus on bringing people together just for the sake of dialogue, then I think we can sometimes end up reinforcing the systems we want to change. So let me tell you a little bit about how this book came to be. I've been thinking about a lot of this for quite a while. I've been feeling like, no, we have all of these processes of engagement, and how much does it really address the fundamental social issues of racism, misogyny, the lack of sustainability of our environment, inequality of income, violation of First Nations rights and well-being. How much have we really made a difference on that through that? And then what really makes a difference? So I've been thinking about those things. And then in the United States, George Floyd was murdered by police officer Derek Chauvin, and in the 9 minutes that Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck, where George Floyd was begging to him to get off because he couldn't breathe before he died, was videotaped and shown around the world, and he created an enormous reaction. There were demonstrations, there was outrage, there was some violence. And what I saw happening in our field was an almost, felt to me like a Pavlovian reaction, where people said, all right, we can really help. We can bring people together. We can bring people together to talk. We can mediate between police and communities. There are all these different ways we can help by bringing people together. All of which I understood why people were saying it, but what really needed to happen is a movement needed to be built. People needed to be upset. People needed to disrupt the system of policing that was continuing to victimize people of color. And so much of the immediate response seemed to be just half of the picture. And so I at first thought maybe the thing to do would be to write a new edition of Beyond Neutrality, which I think some of you are familiar with, which criticized the concept of neutrality as a central organizing principle of what we do. And then I thought, no, I really don't want to write a new edition of that. I want to write something new that could be seen as a follow-up to it, but addresses these issues of social change in a much more direct way, building on some of the other stuff that we'd written. And as I thought about it, I thought, but to be clear, since a lot of these issues involve issues of intersectionality, of power differences, of a system that's been run by basically older white men like me, that I really needed to bring in a more diverse perspective. And my colleague for many years, a very close friend, Jackie Font-Guzman, was interested in participating in it. She and I were professors together at Creighton University for 14 years, and she's now the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Eastern Mennonite University. So she agreed to join me in it. And so I'd like you to move the slide along one, if you will.
I'm just trying to do that, Bernie. Sorry, it's not moving for me. So I'm just going to stop sharing and move it on my screen. And then get it back up for you.
I knew that this was going to be, anyhow, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to do it from here.
No, that's okay.
There we go. So these are two voices from the civil rights movement in the US, and John Lewis was a long-term organizer of some of the most important civil rights demonstrations, and was a victim of some of a brutal beating that was totally recorded, and then he was a congressman for many years, and he died recently. And Ella Baker is was a long-term organizer, sort of a grassroots organizer, was immensely influential in the civil rights movement. And these are just two things that I feel like are motivating statements for what we did. I don't think I need to read them, but I'll leave them up there for a second as I go on. So in a way, the question we were asking is how to help people get into good trouble and necessary trouble, in John Lewis's words, so that change can happen. How can we help people face a system that does not lend itself to our needs, and devise how we can change it, as Ella Baker says. And you know, what I think gets in our way, and if you wanted to put the slides in the background now, would it be okay? Because I don't think we need to be looking at them all throughout this. So, you know, I think that as we're looking at this, what gets in our way is a whole psychology that says our role in conflict is to be neutral, objective, not to take sides, and to see ourselves as purely process people. And there's times when that is what we should probably do, whatever we mean by that. But I think there's a trap here too, because too often, just being neutral when we're dealing with issues where oppression is involved, where there's vast power differentials, where there is a lack of anything approaching a fair playing field, then we get trapped into having the kind of conversations that are very minimalist, that are what we are about the small bore things we can do, and not looking at the systemic groups that we need to deal with many things. So let me just maybe read a quote from the book that tries to get at some of this, and that is about what we mean by the neutrality trap. Dialogue for the sake of dialogue and collaboration for the sake of collaboration, disconnected from a commitment to social change, is likely to reinforce the status quo. This is a neutrality trap. Unless our engagement efforts are matched by an equally strong commitment to disrupting oppressive systems, they will fail to make a profound contribution to social change. By trying to remain objective, neutral, impartial, and separate, conflict interveners and academics, along with many other professionals, reinforce system-maintaining norms, narratives, and practices that perpetuate a status quo that's calling out for change. So that's a theme. That's what we've tried to articulate in this book. We talk about when dialogue makes sense, when disruption makes sense, how conflict interveners can contribute in a constructive way to social activism, how social activists can contribute to dialogue. And I want to address the question, all right, well, if we're not neutral, if we're not talking about being objective, impartial, what are we? What do we bring? Because I think that's a natural question people ask when we talk about this. Well, I think what we can bring, and it's both true to helping figure out systems of disruption and systems of dialogue, is we can bring independence, authenticity, transparency, commitment, respect, humility, integrity, a commitment to good communication, and attention to power and intersectionality, self-awareness, and a multiple dimensional view of people, communities, systems, interests, identity, and other things. But there's a lot we can bring that is not just about bringing people together. It is about integrating the need for coming together, but also for disrupting systems. So let me talk a little bit about systems disruption for a moment, because we tend to be more focused and aware in our field about the dialogue, the coming together, the connecting part. I think systems don't change unless they're pushed to change. And I think leaders don't lead systems to change unless they're pushed to lead systems to change. You know, as a bumper sticker goes, which is probably my favorite bumper sticker. Well, there's two. One is don't believe everything you think. And the other is if the people lead, the leaders will follow. So what do we mean by disruption? Well, we make a distinction in the book between strategic and chaotic disruption. And when we think of of protest movements, and we think about nonviolent approaches to social change, these are efforts to disrupt systems in a sustainable, strategic way. And we tend to be much more comfortable with those approaches to disruption. But we also have to recognize the importance of what we call chaotic disruption. Right after George Floyd was murdered, it wasn't all pretty disruption. Right after Martin Luther King was murdered, it was pretty chaotic, angry disruption. Most successful nonviolent movements have partly succeeded because there was an alternative that people were aware of, not necessarily violence, but an unpredictable type of action. I mean, this is true of Gandhian approaches to social change, and I'm sure there are many Australian examples you could come up with this too. So one of the things we have to understand is that change doesn't just happen in a pretty way. The change happens with people being angry, behaving in ways that are not pretty, that are scary, and are sometimes dangerous. And if we are totally focused on shutting that down and not getting deeper into the roots of the problems involved, then social change is less likely to happen. And I'm not advocating violence here. I'm advocating that we don't do everything we do just with an eye to preventing things from getting a little out of control sometimes. I guess I would also say, and I know some of you are very familiar with this, that we don't also focus on the immediate change, immediate resolution of our differences, but we also have to think about engagement over time, both dialogue over time and disruption over time, because most of the issues we face are long-term. That doesn't mean we can't look for immediate opportunities to work on issues that we can make progress on, and we can talk about examples of that. Nor does it mean we can't focus very, very locally in our work, because I think we have to come up with ways of trying to change systems that have very local manifestations and immediate manifestations in people's lives. But we have to have a long-term view. And I believe we're very important players in trying to make this happen. And I believe the work you do in both acting on conflict, but studying it and studying dispute resolution and peacemaking activities is very important in understanding how all these things play out. And we've tried to take another step in that direction with this book. And with that, I will stop talking and I will look forward to your reactions, questions, confusions, challenges, and see what happens.
Thank you so much, Bernie. You're an incredible thought leader for our field. And I feel glad that you didn't write a second edition of Beyond Neutrality, because I feel this is bigger. This is more, it can't be more important, but this is a bigger movement that sits within the ideas in this book. It's an exciting thing to talk about. And I'd like to welcome back now the members of the ADR Research Network who are here with us today, if they can rejoin. So we've got John Crow, who's the co-convener with me. We've got Amira Aftab from Western Sydney University, and we've got Judith Rafferty and Claire Holland from James Cook University, who were able to be here this morning. So I don't want to hog the discussion, because I could just sit and talk with you all day, Bernie, about your ideas. And I love the idea that there are long-term approaches and then there are some more immediate things that we can do. And everything that you've said, it makes sense to me in terms of thinking about big systemic changes, but also my own practice as a mediator, particularly in areas of family dispute resolution, where there are many of the issues of oppression and power that you mentioned. But I will open it up to the other members who are here. And I know that Judith is running a course at JCU that is pretty much focused on your work. I wonder, Judith, whether you'd like to start the questions or make a comment to Bernie about his book and what he said today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Rachel. Can you all hear me? Because yes, I know that you can't see me and I can't work it out. Like once in a lifetime, I could be on a screen with Bernard Meyer and my camera isn't working. Sorry, that is very devastating for me.
We'll organize another time. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, Bernard, and for doing that introduction to your book. And yeah, as Rachel said, I'm teaching a subject around your book, Staying with Conflict. So I'm very much in the topic in a way. And I have a lot of questions, and I think I will just maybe try to start with one question, then hand over, and hopefully then we can come back to another question. So I think, so because I'm in this book, Staying with Conflict, which what I really appreciate about it and about your other books is that you always make this link between the bigger picture and the theories around conflict and conflict engagement and what it means for practitioners. And I think this is really important for the community that works with people in conflict. And I think a lot of people always ask, well, what is it that I can do here? And I've been thinking a lot about how you discussed, what we can do as practitioners and what role we can actually take in practice to help people with these bigger issue conflicts. And I'm wondering if you have thought a little bit more when writing this book, what it might mean for people who practice in conflict engagement or conflict resolution. What would you say, what are the roles that we can take? Would we be conflict coaches who help people to work through what is going on with them and try to, in some way, push them to see the bigger picture. What sort of qualifications do we need to have? Because this is not simple stuff what you write in your book. And I often feel like practitioners need to be aware of that. What qualifications would we have so that we have, the qualities and skills to help people make these changes that you describe? And I'm going to shut up now. Thank you.
Well, those are all good questions. Which one shall I answer first? I think the practitioner question is important. And let me make it, I think part of this is just about the consciousness we have, no matter what dispute we're working on. If you're doing a family mediation, you have to understand the systemic nature of the patriarchal system, if you will, that is behind a lot of what goes on in families. You don't have to lecture people about it. You're not going to solve the patriarchy about it, but it does have to be part of your consciousness. And if, as a mediator of a resolution to a family issue, you don't even think about that, that can lead to problems. You know, I'm not saying that the woman is always powerless, and it's clearly not the case. But there are an awful lot of systemic biases that go into what happens in divorce, that women are more likely to be in a position of having to both make a living, take care of kids, and make their other partner feel like they're an equal parent, but not, you know, and we're not going to solve all that in a mediation, but it's often going to be right there on the table. And we had better recognize that. So we work at whatever level of system, whatever role we're in, we have to have that is consciousness. When we get to larger systems, but even in smaller ones, a lot of what we have to do is think about who we bring to the table and what is the way we're defining the conflict. So if a conflict at a workplace is simply about how do we resolve a dispute about how overtime is calculated, that might be a real valuable contribution. But it might be playing off, and it often is, perhaps, I'd say, well, I won't say that, but it very frequently is against the place in which there is a real inequality of power that is not always used in a good way. And we don't even see that. We don't even find ways of putting that on the table. We don't find ways of connecting the immediate issue with the longer term concerns. Then we are often reinforcing that power differential. Now, the larger the system we get into, the more likely we are to be playing a role in only one very small part of it. But that one very small part of it can often be involved in helping people make some hard decisions about whether this is a time for them to make progress on an immediate goal or to focus more on a continual disruptive effort. So, for example, in labor management negotiations, let's assume for a moment we're in a very complicated labor management negotiation. I think a lot of times there are a lot of forces that are, let's get the immediate agreement. And what we've seen over time, over and over again, is the immediate agreements are beaten out, sometimes at the last moment. I've done this myself. And what continues to happen then is unions end up more and more being focused on the very specific message, the very specific immediate economic interests of their workers, and not the long-term circumstance of the power of the workers over time, and of also some of the inequalities in the way the workforce itself is constructive. And so we have to think of, is there a role we play on that as well? Now, there are lots of different examples of this that we've given in the book, but let me give you maybe one example, which I'm stealing from my wife, who some of you know, Julia McFarlane, who is involved in a campaign to deal with non-disclosure agreements. And she got involved in this campaign because she herself is a victim of sexual abuse as a young woman and an adolescent. And because she then, as a professor, helped some students who had an issue to, and I want to say this quickly, raise against a faculty member. And the outcome of that was that the faculty member was, they negotiated his termination, but he was given a non-disclosure agreement. His record was wiped clean. He went off to another university. When she was called by that university by some connection that they established to find out why he left the university she was at, University of Windsor, she discovered that when they asked for a reference from the university, they got some form letter saying what a wonderful employee he was. And that's because of a non-disclosure agreement. And so this, is a major problem. It happens in universities throughout the world. It happens in athletics. It happens in corporations. It happens in the military. It happens in government, etc. So she ended up starting a program called really a website and a group called Can't Buy My Silence, with a woman named Zelda Perkins, who was Harvey Weinstein's executive assistant at one point, and then was the first person to break a non-disclosure agreement with him. And they've started a campaign against this that is now being expanded all over the place. And today in the UK, she was on a press conference with the Minister of Education, starting a whole process to get universities to agree to not use non-disclosure agreements in cases of sexual harassment and other kinds of abuse, which I think you will find happening all over. So this is an example of a very specific, immediate issue that started small in our own university and other places and is growing tremendously. And a lot of those things will have to proceed not only with the disruptive actions that are being taken in through publicity, through campaigns to confront people who have signed non-disclosure agreements, but there will be dialogue processes necessary too. And what we have to understand as people in positions like us is we have to help that dialogue happen. We have to not be part of agreeing, of helping people negotiate non-disclosure agreements that will then allow people to go on and continue to commit harassment or other acts of violence or sexual abuse in new institutions. So that, I mean, there's lots of other examples of how we deal with this as a group, of how we work within movements, how we help movements decide when to come together with people on the other side, how when we're bringing people together, we have to give plenty of permission for people to say, no, this isn't the right thing for me. We're being asked to and brought into agreeing to something that is too immediate and too small, and it's undercutting our agreement, our ability to build the movement we need to. So I've often said a mediator's nightmare, again, this is a US example, would be go down to Montgomery, Alabama in 1956 when Rosa Parks refused to sit in the back of the bus and the Montgomery bus boycott started, and we came in and we negotiated an agreement instead of realizing that that was a time where movement had to be built, all sorts of legal action had to be taken. And then a year later, there was a mediated agreement on a whole new turf. Let me just say one thing about the specific skills we need. I mean, it takes skills to do this kind of work. But every citizen does it as well. All of us are at times involved in trying to bring people together and at times disrupting systems of oppression. So if I go out with a bunch of guys and they start making all these misogynistic jokes, I have a role there to play. Not an easy one, not one I love, but I have a role to play there. And it's not easy. It's not easy to do it in a way that calls out what's happening and does it in a way that doesn't absolutely cut off the relationship. And so I think we all have a role to do it, and we all have to learn how to do it, and it's important.
Thank you, Bernie. Yeah, it is a difficult role, but such an important one to speak out and not be a bystander on what needs to change. Who else would like to put a question to Bernie or make a comment? Claire, you look like you're keen to go.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for those great examples there, Bernie. And as you were explaining a little bit more about things that your book touched on, such as around the importance of a conflict resolution practitioner or specialist to sometimes support groups to get upset or to get into that good trouble, as you described it. I was wondering if you had any examples or thoughts around what that sort of getting upset might look like with a clear strategy around, conflict intervention and something that would support ongoing conversations, as you've described, around engagement that might need to occur over years. Thank you.
Well, I think often of where I failed to do it, to be honest, and why that was a problem. I have some examples where I did do it too. But let me just sort of make a overly broad statement that I have seldom made a mistake by asking people to go deeper into what they were upset about. And I've often made a mistake by trying to make sure it didn't get out of hand. So an example of where I think I did a pretty good, I'll give you a family example of where I think I did a pretty good job of going deeper and taking a strategic approach. I was actually asked to mediate a case that had been in a collaborative practice, and it had gone, and they'd gotten stuck. And they had said they weren't going to, the lawyers weren't going to represent them in court, and they were just reaching all this kind of resistance. So they asked me to help mediate. And so it's I was well after the major part of my practice was about mediating family cases, but I did this one. I went in there and I listened, and everything was about, what are your best alternatives to negotiate an agreement, and how could we make this agreement work better for you? And, think about all the costs of going to court, and et cetera, et cetera. And I just remember looking at particularly the wife at this point, who I think was a strong person, but not in a structurally strong position. And I just looked at her and said, you don't have to settle. I could see why you might want to go to court. I could see why it'd be really hard to come to an agreement here that you'd end up feeling all right about, and then you ended up feeling you hadn't been taken advantage of. Now, we can work as hard as you want on trying to find what's the best thing you can do here. But I have no reason to think it's the best thing for you to do to settle here whatsoever. It may not be. And I can't tell you what's the right thing for you to do, but I don't think anybody else in this room can either besides you. That kind of thing. And that actually opened things up. It really calmed things down. It was a whole different discussion. And a number of times where I've been in labor management, let me give a different example, where I was in a discussion dealing with ethnic conflict in Eastern Europe. So a lot of this was through a translator. I was dealing with, trying to figure out how to make these complicated things simple here. A social agency context dealing with people from ethnic minority, in this case, Roma. people. And they were representatives of Roma people, and there was representatives of power structure, really, the municipal government, social agencies. And they were saying some incredibly racist things about how they just don't take care of their kids, and their kids are going out there stealing from everything. And these were people from the Roma community really trying to figure something out. And here I guess I had enough time to think because I had to wait for things to get translated. And I said then, I thought I was going to get kicked out of there. I said, all right, hang on, that's racist. To my ears, that sounds racist. And that could be a large part of the problem why you're not able to really talk to each other, because you don't recognize the racism involved here. And if we're going to be helpful, we have to be able to talk about it and do better. And I know I'm from an outsider, and it's easier for me to say that, but it really sounds that way. And I don't know how you expect you can work with people if that's what you're going to do. Something like that. Now, it's possible the person was great, who looked at me and then translated, found some way of reframing it that I have no idea about. But it ended up actually leading to a much longer, deeper connection. Racism kept occurring against the Muslim community as well. But it kept on, but there were more reactions to it, like rolling of the eyes, saying something about it, looking at me, asking me to say something about it. And it continued in informal actions as well. So I think those are two examples maybe where, and I can come up with others, where it was done. You ask whether it was done strategically, and at the moment I had to act. And I have strategies that say you name the elephant on the table, and things change. But let me tell you a time I didn't do it, and I wish I had. I was doing with a colleague, facilitating a dialogue between animal rights activists, hunters, environmentalists, trappers, state wildlife officials, about policies about trapping. And these are people who have been fighting each other legislatively in court and political actions for a long time. And then at one session, the guy who was a trapper wanted to show people his traps and how they were geared so they would minimize pain to animals. And we tried to put that off, but no, he really wanted to do it. So he came with his traps. And you can imagine the reaction he got. Up stepped a animal rights activist and said, I want to tell you, you're murderers. And what you're doing is murder. I don't know how you could do that with a straight face. And what I think I needed to say was, all right, tell me more, essentially, in one way or another. Those are the three words I say that 95% of the time when you don't know what to do, you can use those three words. And the other 5% of the time, they'll probably get you into trouble. But I didn't. I said, well, all right, I understand you have very different values about, what constitutes life and humane treatment. And that's why we're here. We're really here to share those values. And maybe we can do that in a way that really respects those differences and wants to understand them. That was a wrong intervention. Can you see why? It did not help. We went forward, we limped our way through that, but I wished I had just said something very different. You really want to change a very fundamental system that is not likely to change through a dialogue in this room. So what do you want to have happen here? And maybe what you want to have happen is you just want to each have to have your say and go home or go on to your next thing. But we'll see.
So Amira and John, would you like to put a comment or question to Bernie?
Well, it strikes me, Bernie, that one of the themes of what we've been talking about is that you started out by saying that dialogue is often not enough when you're dealing with systemic issues, and some other kind of disruption may be needed. But it also seems like we're talking about different ways of doing dialogue, and there might be some ways of doing dialogue that are more conducive to go hand in hand with systemic change. So I wonder if you want to make any comment about that.
No, that's a really important question. I think dialogue is important. I do not say, in fact, it's essential. It is about integrating these two different tensions between, connecting and disrupting. I just think that in our field, we only think about dialogue, which is why I'm emphasizing the other side of it. When I talk to social activists, there's another side of the coin. I just think it has to be done in a way that's cognizant of this, of the danger of doing it without, in a way that is about getting people so focused on what they can immediately accomplish that their ability to build a movement, like in the Rosa Parks story I told, which I also hope translates to Australia, is a example that it undercuts the social change effort. And yet, and some of the most important kinds of dialogue build up. You don't start by bringing people together. You start by people working with people separately. So in the most intense, I'm not, when I've done labor management negotiations, I'm not one of these people who bring people together for opening statements, separates them and bangs them all over the head to try to come up with an agreement. It works sometimes, but it's not me. But where I really try to make a difference in the nature of relationships, it's really required a lot of separate work, where people have to understand what kind of is the source of their power, what do they really want, what are their own internal issues, how do they want to broaden their capacity to get the kind of changes they want, and that the bringing together really arises out of that, doesn't presuppose that, or doesn't just do this and you don't deal with the other part of it. In some of the most important environmental work I've done, that's been a big part of it, really, is how do you help different elements figure out their own shit, frankly, and what their real goals are, and what is the right venue for them before making the automatic assumption that we know. Because then when dialogue happens, it can happen in a much more powerful way. And I have to watch that I don't get resolution fever. You know what summit fever is if you're a mountaineer? Well, it kills people. I've experienced it climbing mountains where I thought I could beat a lightning storm in because I wanted to make the summit, It's, resolution fever. Because you have to be, despite your business model, you have to be totally comfortable with the fact that a dialogue is for the sake of people talking about what they really need to talk about, not about getting a end that you can put a notch in your belt about. And our business models are so oriented by saying, we'll get it done. We have to be very careful about that. I've said this in previous books, but this takes it, as you said, to a new level, I think, I hope. I wanted to make mention of one thing that is a sub-theme in the book, which is we have to ask ourselves, how do we make sense, and how do we help people make sense of behavior that we can't make sense of? It's a chapter I call Beyond Crazy, Stupid, and Evil. How do we really make sense of what's going on? I'm tempted to say, and I know this is going to take place a little time from now, but how do we make sense of Novak Djokovic? But we won't go there. Instead, I talk about how can we understand not Donald Trump, but people who supported him, the people the Make America Great Again crowd, the MAGA crowd, the people who invaded the Capitol? Or how do we understand anti-vaxxers? I mean, maybe some of your members are, but I would be a little be surprised if a lot of them were. How do we understand people who come from that? And the answer is, we have to get beyond, because this is a way we can help. This answers some of your other questions. How do we actually help? We have to help people think beyond that they're crazy, stupid, or evil, but also just what are their interests and concerns. And we have to think beyond even what are their identity needs or their survival needs or the deeper. We have to think, in what sense are they right? And in what sense is what they're saying, the system doesn't work for us? And this is how we're taking it out. And this is our way of disrupting the system. And this is our way of saying something needs to change. Now, a lot of times their way is racist, in some examples I've given. But we better understand that the racism is in service of something else as well. It may be a position of power over others and wanting to maintain their privilege, but in the face of seeing that something they value other than that and deeper than that is threatened. And I think we all face our gloominess with COVID, our gloominess with the 2 years we've been under, the way it's taking a tremendous toll, is part of a bigger sense that our systems aren't capable of dealing with a lot of the problems we face. And climate change is right at the top of the list. I think there's a big, deep level in which we don't believe we are able to deal with it. I don't know if you saw Don't Look Up, the movie Don't Look Up, but that, in a way, that's what it's trying to address. It is, I don't know, maybe we aren't. You know, maybe the cerebral cortex was a dysfunctional evolutionary development. I don't know. But I also believe that if we just give into that, we're making a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the part of our obligation as conflict people is to maintain a sense that things can get better. This is in a previous book, I talked about dealing with the optimism and realism paradox. That we need to hold the capacity that we can make a difference. And I believe that, but maybe naively at times, but I do believe that. And yet that holding that optimistic space has to also mean holding a realistic space. And that's one of the things I think we do in our work, both as activists and as conflict interveners. We try to hold both the hope for change can happen and the realism about how hard it can be. And it is one of the ways we make a difference.
I think that's such an important point, Bernie, that, you know, we really are all about, I think every person in the network is about making a difference in our field and with people, and all the things, the profound things that you're saying today sort of, just speak to how the skills that you need are so complex and the insights that you need are deeply profound, but also it's just about connecting with other human beings and with the state of being alive on the planet as it is today, which throws so many challenges at us. But also the optimistic side of things is a very much part of our network. I think we are all optimistic that we can make a difference. I think one of the interesting things about our network is that as dispute resolution people, conflict people, there's usually just one or two of us at each institution. So we're sort of on our own as the dispute resolution person at a particular institution or law school. But what the network does is give us an opportunity to come together. And the thing that we love about these roundtables is that they allow us to connect about all the things that we care about together. And I think, you know, what you're saying today is a great opportunity for us to do that, to be connecting at that level and remembering, you know, what we're for and why we're passionate about dispute resolution and peaceful conflict resolution. I think it's really good in this roundtable version that we've got this year with the recorded approach, that we don't have to sort of think that we're preventing people from getting to their morning tea or anything with the, with the timing of things. But I am mindful of the time. And we've had the pleasure of your company for almost an hour now. So I think I'll just give Amira the opportunity to put a question to you before we close. Amira, what would you like to comment or ask?
Well, thanks, Rachel, and thank you, Bernie. I don't have a question because I think all the questions asked were kind of in line with what I was thinking, but I just wanted to say thank you. And I found it really powerful to just kind of that reinforcement that we need to think about, we'll get to the roots of problems and think about systemic change. And it's something that I've been grappling with in my own work recently. What is the role of a dispute resolution practitioner when dealing with culture or religion, when that comes up in family dispute resolution? And, does it mean that we bring in other, people that can support, assist parties, whatever that looks like, or is it the role of the practitioner, and what does that look like? So I thought it was really interesting that question that you posed, Bernie, if we're not neutral and we're not objective or impartial, then what are we and what do we bring? And so I think that's something that is going to stay with me, and I'm going to think about that further. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And may I say that one of the key things we have to think about is allyship. Who are the allies? Our allies you were just talking about, that you're alone, but or just with a couple others. How do we create networks of allies? And I think one of the things that has been interesting to me over the last 2 years is how much we've had to do it like this. I mean, I'd like to think you're all my allies in a sense. And I certainly have had to form other groups like that. And I think one of our roles is to help people feel like, who are their allies and where do they need to give it? And it's not like we do it for them, although sometimes we do. But mostly that's one of our there's a chapter on that, allies and leadership, really. And how do we, and so I think what you've just said is a great way to kind of wind up here in a sense. I think we have to think about culture, we have to think about power, but we have to think about part of the connection we have to think about is our own. How are we supported? How do we get connection with other people in whatever worlds we're in? And I very much appreciate frankly, the long-term connections I've had with people in Australia. I've been coming there for over 25 years. And I'm very appreciative to be invited into your ally network. So
thank you so much, Bernie. It's our privilege and our honour to invite you in and to have you join us, and give us the benefit of your wisdom and thoughtfulness. And the words that you said earlier about authenticity and transparency really are ringing in my mind at the moment, but also respect. And I think those are key words that we find in our network. And so we're so thrilled to have you as part of the network now. You're part of us now, Bernie. I hope you don't mind. You are our ally and we're your ally. And part 2 of this keynote will be held online, so that when we put this recording up as a post for our blog, there will be the opportunity for people to post comments and to be part of a discussion. So we hope that you'll continue to be engaged in dialogue with us about these ideas, and hopefully it's another avenue at an international sort of level, because our blog goes out internationally, for your book to be disseminated and continue to make such impact. We really appreciate your time today, Bernie, and we really can't thank you enough, but it's been an absolute excitement for our 10th anniversary roundtable to be able to have you with us, and makes up for the time that we missed you last time. So best wishes to Julie, and thank you so much.
And thank you very much, and good luck for your conference. And I wish you all well as you proceed in your really important work.
Thank you. And thank you also to the other members of the network who were here today, John Crow, Judith Rafferty, Claire Holland, and Amira Aftab. And just to say that Judith, Claire, Amira, John and myself will all be contributing to the ongoing blog posts of the Roundtable. And I think that Judith and Claire will have some things that may particularly sort of spark your interest, Bernie. So we hope that you'll stay connected with what we're posting.
I will. Send me the URL.
We will. Okay, thanks so much. Bye, Bernie.